Good day, students. Welcome to PNAD ACCA e-learning. This is Strategic Business Reporting, SBRO. And the standards we'll be looking at for today is IFRS 8 segment reporting. Now let's start. So segment reporting, IFRS 8 applies to entities whose debt and equity instruments are publicly traded. Then the standard goes to define what an operating segment is. So an operating segment is defined as a component of an entity that engages in business activities from which it earns revenues and incurs expenses, whose operating results are regularly reviewed by the entity CODM. CODM means Chief Operating Decision Maker. And finally, for which discrete financial information is available. Now, these are the qualities that businesses, subunits can have for you to identify them as what operating segments. So you may have subsidiaries that has this quality, it's an operating segment. You may have strategic business units, branches, different locations of your business. If it meets these characteristics I've just read out to you, which is 1 through 3, then it meets the definition of an operating segment. Now, IFRS 8 says that 2 or more operating segments can be aggregated and reported as a single operating segment, provided that they have similar economic characteristics and are similar in the following respects. 1, product and services, production process, classes of customer, and distribution method. It means you can aggregate 2 or more operating segments to become a single operating segment if they have if the customers are the same, the product and services are the same, distribution methods are the same, then of course you can aggregate them together to form a single operating segment. Now, say an entity must separately report, please take notes, information about an operating segment that meets any of, not all of, any of the following quantitative thresholds. And what are these quantitative thresholds? You have 3. Say it's reported revenue, including sales to external customers, and inter-segment sales, that sales outside the group and sales within the group, is 10% or more of the combined revenue of all operating segments. So there's going to be a measurement that you have to carry out, which needs some basic calculation. All you're trying to do is to see if it meets at least 10% of it. 2, its reported profit or loss is 10% or more of the greater in the absolute amount of. Now, sometimes it gets confusing at this point for students. Now, let me break it down for you. Its reported profit or loss is 10% or more of the greater in the absolute amount of 1, the combined reported profit of all segments that did not report a loss. So it means all the segments that made profit, you group them together. B, the combined reported loss of all operating segments that reported a loss. It means all the segments that made loss, you group them together. What you are trying to do is to find out if an operating segment should be reportable. When you say if it should be reportable, it means that the financial information of that operating segment will be separately disclosed in the financial statements, because it meets any or all of these quantitative thresholds. Now, when they say absolute amount of, so let's say, for example, you have like 3 branches somewhere. Let's say profit or loss for those branches. Now, let's say branch A, branch B, and branch C. Let's say branch A made a profit of $100 million. Branch B made a profit of $80 million. And of course, branch C made a loss of $190 million. What it means is that if it comes to this part, if I want to take measurement or see the 10% here, these two combined is what? All segments that made profit that did not make a loss. Here is 180. All segments that made loss that did not make profit is what? 190. Now, absolute amount means that you ignore the negative sign. So if I'm going to look at the greater of, it's going to be 190. So I'm going to measure with 190. Now, if I get to branch A, I will take 100 million over 190 and see if it's up to 10%. If I get to branch B, I'll do 80 million over 190 and see if it's what? Up to what? 10%. That is what I mean. So take note of that. You are looking for the greater. You're looking for the measurement. Reported profit or loss is 10% or more of the greater in the absolute amount of all branches that made profit that did not make loss, and all branches that made loss that did not make profit. I hope it's clear. Now, the third one is its assets are 10% or more of the combined assets of all operating segments. Pretty much straightforward, just like the first one. Then, finally, if you meet any of this threshold or all of the threshold, it can be 1 over 3, it can be 2 over 3, it can be 3 over 3. The standard is saying if it meets any of the threshold, it can also meet all the thresholds, please. After you have done that, you now carry out the last test, which is called the 75% test. So the first one, what I normally do, tell students, when you are solving, if you want to do your calculation, this one, the heading will be revenue test. The second one will be what? Profit or loss test. The third one will be asset test. And this final one will be what? 75% test. Different subheadings. Do the calculation before you start explaining to the examiner. Now let's see. See, the final 75% test says at least 75% of the entities' external revenue must be included in reportable segments. It means that all the segments you have identified as reportable segments that must have met any of the first 3 thresholds or all of the first 3 thresholds, I will not carry out a final test. I will add them together and see if their external sales, are up to 75% of the total external sales. So what I will do is say, at least 75% of the entity's external revenue must be included in reportable segments. Now, if it does not meet that 75% test, it means that other segments should be identified as reportable segments until that 75% of external revenue is reported. I know if I do a question and I find out that, hey, one of these branches met one of the quantitative threshold, maybe the first test, maybe revenue test. Another branch again meets another test, maybe this time profit or loss test. If these are the 2 branches that meet the threshold, they are reportable segment. They are reportable segment here, but I need to still carry out the 75% test. Now, what I will do is to look at the external sales of these 2 branches that have met the first either of the 3 thresholds. I will total them together. Now, the total of the 2 branches external sales must be at least 75% of the total external sales of all the branches in that group. If it does not meet 75%, then other segments should be identified as reportable segments until that 75% of external revenue is reported. So automatically, all other branches becomes reportable segments until it meets that 75% test. Then you will now be required to disclose information about that 2 branches alone. That is what this information means. So you may need basic calculation in your examination. Now let's see. Information about other business activities and operating segments that are not reportable are combined into all other segments category. Let's say 2 branches meet the definition, the criteria, the first three quantitative threshold, and goes ahead to meet the 75% test, if you group this A and B, for example, two branches as reportable segment, the other segment, you group them together and become what? All other segments. You call them all other segments. Segment category. Management may report operating segments separately if management believes that information about the segment will be useful to users of the financial statements. Now, what are the disclosure requirements for this standard? 1, the factors used to identify reportable segments. 2, the types of product and services sold by each of the reportable segment. It's a very simple standard. Now, let's see a simple question. Say, example, AKP, a retail and leisure group, has 3 businesses operating in different parts of the world. AKP reports to management on the basis of region. The results of the regional segments for the year ended 31st/12/2009 are as follows. Europe, North America, Asia. You can see the revenue has broken down into 2. You have external, you have internal, you have segment result, profits or loss. You can see that Europe made loss of $10 million. Then you have their assets figures. Required, advise management whether Europe is a reportable segment. So it means that I need to carry out the 10% test. So the first one I will do is revenue test. Revenue test. So I will total all the revenue I have in the question. Take note, all revenues, including external revenues and inter-segment sales. Take note, that was what we said. So it will be 140 million. Plus now, if I total all of these together, what is going to give me? It will give me 1,500 million. Okay? Now, 10% of this will give me 150 million. Now, let's see the total sales for Europe. Total sales for Europe is 145 million. So, no, it doesn't meet the revenue test. No, it doesn't meet the test. The next one will be profit or loss test. Now, remember, I'm going to group them on its own, on their own. All the loss to one place, all the profit to one place. So, if it's loss, total loss is equal to $10 million. Remember the absolute amount of $10 million. Then the total profit is what? 165 million. Now from the two, which one is greater? It's obviously is the total profit, which is 165. So the measurement is going to be 10% of 165. So you now have 165 million times 10%. So that will be equals to what? That will be equals to 16.5 million. This is the 10%. Does it meet? Now let's look at this. The profit of the loss of Europe. The loss of Europe is $10 million. It is less than 16.5 million. It's not up to 10% of the total profit, which is the greater of the absolute amount of total profit and total loss. So here is also no. Doesn't meet that one test. The next test is what? Asset test. Asset test, I'll total all of them. That is 300 million plus 800 million plus now if I total all of these, this will give me 3,100 million. 10% of this is going to be 310 million. Now, what's the total asset of Europe? 300 million. 300 million is less than 310 million, so no, still doesn't cross that test. So in this case, it has failed revenue test, profit or loss test, asset test. So of course, Europe cannot be what? A reportable segment. If Europe had met any of these tests or all of the tests or two of them, the next thing I would have gone to do was to carry out the 75% test and compare the external sales of Europe and see if it's up to 75% of the total external sales of Europe, North America, and Asia. If it is yes, then Europe alone will be a reportable segment. If no, all three of them will be reportable segments until that 75% test is passed for Europe. I hope it's very clear. In the exam, be very skillful. You see questions like this, first explain what operating segment is. Don't forget the rule in answering questions in the exam. Identify the standard. That you identify the standards in your mind. The next thing is to explain a little bit of the standards. Then apply the standards to the scenario and make logical conclusions. Don't forget, your SBRO questions now includes ethical requirements. So you may have ethics mixed with the question. Always identify those ethical issues in the question and answer them in the examination. Okay? Now, let me bring this up again. Now, it's in the nature, I've noticed that sometimes in the examination, the examiner may not give you figures. In that case, you may need to think of how to group operating segments to become one reportable segment. So that is where you need this part. Very key. If you don't see figures, don't fret. When you see different branches or different units, it's operating segments. But you don't see figures, you'll be like, Andrew said we should carry out revenue test and this test and this test. But the examiner may be looking, if you have the skill and understanding of IFRS 8, to group one or more, two or more operating segments to become one operating segment in line with IFRS 8. So please take note of that. Thank you very much for your time. My name is Pinok Andrew. Thank you.